Welcome to Fundraising Leaders with Drew, where we embark on a journey to discover the heart and soul of nonprofit fundraising and decode the strategies that lead to fundraising success. I'm your host, Drew Clancy, and today I am grateful to be joined by President Matt Vandenberg, the 17th president of Ohio Wesleyan University. Matt has been serving in his current role since July 1st, 2023. Interestingly, while serving as student body president at his alma mater, Alma College, Matt was told by then Alma president, Sandra Tracy, that she could see him one day becoming a college president. Ever since that day, that has been Matt's career goal. Prior to being named president at Ohio Wesleyan, he served as president at Presbyterian College, and before that, in leadership fundraising roles at Alma, Albion College, and Indiana University School of Informatics and Computing. Let's jump right in with President Matt Vandenberg. Well, first of all, Matt, thanks again for being part of Fundraising Leaders with Drew. You have an extensive, prior to becoming president of Ohio Wesleyan University, you have an extensive background in fundraising, serving as vice president for advancement and external relations at your alma mater, Alma College. Before that, as associate vice president for development at Albion College, and also you have also worked in the for-profit fundraising world. And I just thought maybe a good question to kind of kick things off. I'm sure you've developed a philosophy around fundraising. Share a little bit about how you see this critical area.
Thanks, Drew. Great to be with you. And I think what you basically said in outlining my my CV there is that I'm old. I've done a lot of different things over the course of my career, and I've gotten to see fundraising from a number of different backgrounds and perspectives. And sure, I certainly have several driving philosophies, but among the most important to me are that people give to people. Really, I think people respond, yes, to a strong story, yes, to a cause that they care about. But ultimately, it's that relationship that you have, the belief that a donor has in an institution's leadership and the person who's in front of them that is so very important in their decision making. And so I always try to have it at the forefront of my mind, of my thinking, that, if you're not being inspiring, if you're not thinking about how to make the world a better place through your institution, you're missing the mark. And so that's sort of my clarion call for getting out of bed every single morning.
So good. So good. Let's talk a little bit. You've been president now at Ohio Wesleyan for a little over a year. And I'm sure you're in the process of creating a vision and goals for fundraising there. What are your plans to elevate the fundraising efforts at Ohio Wesleyan?
So I've been at Ohio Wesleyan for a little under a year. We're still finishing our first year. I think I started July 1, so about 11 months on the job. I feel like I now know where the bathroom is, and I know how to get a few basic things done. But I come to Ohio Wesleyan with tremendous respect for what this institution has accomplished, both in philanthropic terms, but overall. We've had a phenomenal campaign in our recent history that I think raised upwards of $250 million, which is really pretty incredible for most small private residential liberal arts institutions. We have a $300 million endowment, so we're in the 90th, 91st percentile or so in American higher education. I really get excited about helping us to think about what does it look like for us to have a $500 million endowment, to have $1 billion endowment. Throw some audacious goals out there. And then what does the world look like with a phenomenal place like Ohio Wesleyan having those resources to be able to bring to bear to deliver our mission in incredible new ways?
Oh, love that. Love that. Ohio Wesleyan has a strong tradition of alumni giving. How do you plan, and you've referenced this, how do you plan on building on that legacy and engaging more alumni, more donors?
Yeah, one of the things that I find myself saying quite a bit about Ohio Wesleyan is that we've always been at our best when we don't just do things that make Ohio Wesleyan better, but that make the world better through Ohio Wesleyan. And so I really spend a lot of time thinking in these early weeks and months, how can we create an exciting new world through Ohio Wesleyan? And then philanthropy becomes one of the ways in which donors are able to achieve some of the things that they care about most. So I think the biggest donors care about solving big problems. And the question to me is really, how do we position Ohio Wesleyan as the social problem solver of choice for those individuals? And then philanthropy is part of that partnership, part of that unified approach to addressing that social challenge.
I like that. Um, Talking a little bit about relationships and where you started in cultivating relationships. How do you approach that? How, now as president of the university, give us a little bit kind of behind the scenes. How do you kind of come about that? What are different strategies perhaps that you use or ways you think about this key area? Share a little more about that.
Yeah, just in general about
Yeah,
engaging
yeah,
donors and building relationships.
you bet. Exactly.
So I think, and you really learn this at CCS fundraising, which is, if you're not familiar with that company, you're a fundraising consultant when you work for CCS, and you are embedded in an organization helping to either do a campaign feasibility and planning study, an advancement audit, or running the day-to-day operations of a major fundraising initiative. And I got to do all of those things in my time there. But one of the big takeaways there, one of the formative experiences was the power of enlisting potential donors as volunteers. And we've had tremendous success leveraging volunteer engagement to catalyze fundraising success at a few different institutions I've served. I really like volunteerism because volunteers are, I just read, 66% more likely to make philanthropic gifts than non-volunteers. And volunteers give an average of 10 times more money than non-volunteers.
Wow.
And young donors in particular think about their charitable path in part by testing the waters. They check out nonprofits they're interested in by first volunteering and then deciding whether giving is right for them. But peer-to-peer fundraising, especially as a volunteer opportunity, can be particularly powerful. So time and time again, there's this annual Bank of America study of high net worth philanthropy or philanthropists.
Sure.
And it says over and over again that donors who make $1 million plus gifts to charity often respond especially well to a peer who is already invested and ask them to join them.
Oh,
And so, kind of using that lesson at Alma College, we were able to get a whole lot of things done. So when I came to Alma as VP for advancement, the board and the president at the time listed poor constituent engagement, especially alumni, as one of the college's most pressing challenges. They actually called this a top 5 existential issue at the time that I started. So I did this listening tour, and in response to that, my team and I created what we called the Alma Ambassador program. And the driving idea was that a lot of people wanted to become involved, but there really wasn't a mechanism or an organized pathway for them to become involved. And the Alma Ambassador program was a named branded pathway that sort of scratched that itch. It promoted, organized, and supported really all stripes of volunteerism to the college. It gave us a way to organize and distribute a menu of volunteer engagement opportunities. And what made it unique was that you could do a little or you could do a lot. It didn't matter where you lived. And it wasn't just a push to collect volunteers and name, it was actually just as much of a pull. And what I mean by that is that whenever someone would perform an act of service or volunteerism to the college, we'd pull them into this ambassador program. We'd send them a thank you and a welcome email. We gave them branded lapel pins, and we put them on a listserv to get a special newsletter with insider updates and success stories and more volunteer opportunities. And it kind of became the cool thing to do if you were a graduate, if you were a parent, or even if you were a student. And arguably the most successful component of the ambassador program was our prospective student referral initiative. And here's how that worked. So it used to be that if you referred a student to Alma College, you would get a t-shirt, and we changed that. We made it so that when someone referred a prospective student, that student would actually get $1,000 scholarship in the name of the person who made the referral. So that created a strong connection between and among the person making the referral, the student receiving the referral, and the college. And that program, Drew, it took off almost instantly. So prior to the program, if Alma got like 50 referrals in a year, it was an amazing year. In the first year of this program, Alma College received 978 prospective student referrals.
Oh my.
And then the next year it was 1,200, then 1,300, and then 1,400. Almost 1,500 referrals a year became the norm for Alma College.
Wow.
It was a really strong way to engage, especially younger alumni and students who often, they didn't necessarily always feel like they had the wherewithal to make gifts. But making a referral meant giving the gift of an Alma education to someone else, and it meant making the gift of net tuition to Alma College. So it was a win-win-win. And within a year or two of the Alma Ambassador program starting, we counted our volunteers by the thousands. So within 2 years, it actually became the largest volunteer engagement program at a small private liberal arts college in the United States.
Wow.
We ended up winning 13 CASE awards for the overall program and several of its component pieces, including what we were most proud of was the Platinum Award for Best Practices in Alumni Relations. But it was the overall impact on fundraising that was so exciting to us. So here's one of my favorite data points. The group of volunteers who joined the program during the first year had collectively given a little bit less than $500,000 the previous year. After their first year in the ambassador program, that same group of people gave $1.8 million.
Oh my.
During the time in which the ambassador program existed, I believe Alma's now sunset it, but annual giving went up from an average of about $900,000 a year. That was the run rate, to upwards of $1.6 million. That became the new run rate. Overall financial production also went up in my 6 years there. So the run rate had been something like a little bit less than $6 million. We averaged $17 million in annual financial production during the course of the Alma Ambassador program. And then just the last thing I'll say, the overall campaign results were really pretty spectacular. And I think a huge testament to the power of enlisting people as volunteers. The previous record for a campaign at Alma College had been $37.3 million. And our campaign during the time that the ambassador program existed, that campaign raised $125 million.
Oh my. Wow. Wow. That's spectacular.
So volunteerism is something
Congratulations.
I'm really big.
Are there, I mean, wow, what a success. Do you look at, and it sounds like that was the cornerstone, were there other strategies you used, Matt, as part? I'm sure there were other maybe secondary strategies you use to help achieve that incredible goal?
Yeah, one of the things that we really tried to do was, you know, put everything that we did under the branding of either the ambassador program or the campaign itself. And one of the things that kind of fit in both categories was the use of our own sort of approach to giving circles. They were a huge engagement tool that we used when I was at Alma. So one of the things that we noticed was that our alumni base was driven less by class connectivity. So the class of, pick your year, that meant less to Alma College alumni, we thought, than the connections that they felt with different affinity groups. So
Sure.
sports teams, music ensembles, academic programs. And we decided to take advantage of that by identifying some of the most active affinity groups in our alumni base and kind of rallying them around a specific fundraising initiative that would benefit that favorite program of theirs.
Right, right.
And so we targeted things like Model United Nations, the marching band, the choir. We did a program for the football team and more. And they all sort of followed a similar pattern. We'd start by identifying a few significant potential donors, especially ones that hadn't given a lot to Alma College in the past, but they did care about that particular affinity group.
Sure.
That was one of the criteria is that they needed to certainly have capacity and the ability to make a pace setting gift. And then we wanted to choose people, to activate people that hadn't necessarily given a whole lot, but who were fired up about this one thing. And then we would ask them to lead the fundraising effort by making a pace setting gift and helping us through peer-to-peer fundraising and leading a committee. That committee, once we formed it, would work with the faculty or the staff member who kind of ran the program to determine the use or the impact of the collective funds given. And they would help share an ownership for the success of the initiative. So we'd set the goal, we would declare success, and we would celebrate. And it was this incredible donor acquisition tool. So I remember the choir giving circle alone was particularly successful. We acquired hundreds of donors who hadn't really ever given much to the college. We raised a few $100,000 from this group in just a few months' time. And the effort actually encouraged a donor to provide a 7-figure estate commitment. And then that in turn inspired another person to make their own 7-figure estate commitment. So it just started to snowball. And now that program has a new generation of donors who continue to give because they started giving with this program, but they've also now realized one of those estate commitments and they have a 7-figure endowment as a result.
Oh my. Wow. What a great success. I'm tempted to ask you if there was a third strategy. These are awesome. Really, really good. Is there anything else you would want to cover before we move on?
Well, I want to be careful and
Sure.
point out that this is a team effort. Fundraising is a team effort, and I was really fortunate to be a part of this team to have a seat at the leadership table when we were able to do these things. But it was the generosity of our benefactors, the kindness of our volunteers, and the talent of our faculty and staff that made all of this possible. And I was just along for the ride.
Wow. That actually is a nice segue. So now, obviously, in a different seat as president of the university, talk a little bit about, different presidents have kind of different philosophies around fundraising. How do you see fundraising as president of the university? What is your role? Where do you look to get involved?
Yeah. It's interesting to become president and then to work with the sort of division of the institution that you kind of grew up in. And so one of the things that unfortunately I went to, how to become the president boot camp in a few different places. And one of the things that they try to help you remember is that it's important to avoid the urge to serve as VP for whatever division you came up through
Right.
as president. So you have a VP for advancement. At Ohio Wesleyan, we have a very talented VP for advancement. So my first philosophy is it's important to let her do her job. She's really good at it. She's been here longer than I have. She is a graduate of the institution. She knows more people than I have. She has a deeper well of relational capital than I do. And so my job is to relinquish some control and let her show me the road. And, it's also important for you to know what your own strengths are as president. And for me, in a fundraising context, I really like closing. And I also like helping on the early side to excite potential donors about a vision. And so I find myself often involved on the very front end or even the back end. I'm pretty good at helping to manufacture a sense of urgency where urgency might not otherwise live in advancement work. And so we tend to use me in situations where we need one of those two things, either to inspire folks about a vision, to solve a problem, to align incentives on the front end, or on the back end to try and manufacture urgency, to try and make a really big deal out of a donor saying yes to us.
Love that. Love that. Yep. Take us behind the scenes in terms of maybe the partnership with your vice president and obviously your board. How do you, any thoughts on cultivating those key relationships? Two different questions. Maybe starting with the advancement office, your vice president there. How do you collaborate? How do you work together? And then talk a little bit about working with the board.
Yeah, we have a very engaged, very successful, very generous board of trustees, and it is really easy and a joy to work with them on philanthropic decision making. The other thing that I left out in my earlier answer is that when you're a president and you come to a new situation, your vice presidents all have a working dynamic with the previous president, and so there's a flow to the work that you do that you have to kind of understand, appreciate, and become a student of before you seek to make any changes. Because even though you might like to work a certain way, maybe that isn't the way that it works the best
Sure.
at that institution. And so, really, this has been a year of learning for me. What we are trying to think about is as we form the foundation of a strategic plan, as we think about our strategic position in this higher education marketplace, what does a campaign look like, and who are the people that I really need to be meeting, who are the difference makers? I'm really struck by the fact that it's no longer it hasn't been an 80-20 rule for a long time. It hasn't been the 80% of your money comes from 20% of the donors rule for a long time. It's now like the 90-10 rule or the 95-5 rule. And so figuring out where the president really needs to spend her or his time and meeting those people, developing those relationships, avoiding the urge to do less of this and more of this. And if you're just listening to the podcast, I just basically signaled with my hand, less of the spreading yourself too thin and more of the picking your places very strategically where you're going to deploy your efforts because they will have the greatest difference on your fundraising effort.
So good. So good. What about talking about major donors? How do you think about, how do you approach, create that relationship? Obviously, relatively new in your current position. How do you go about developing those relationships, or how do you think about it? Or share a little bit there. It's a critical function, obviously.
Yeah, there are some similarities there with what you do as a president to what you do as a VP for advancement. It really is about establishing a well of trust and belief that you're a good leader, that you're ethical, that you'll do things the right way, that you have the institution's interest at heart, and that you actually care about people, that you bring an authenticity to relationship building. You don't look at donors as ATMs because they're not. They are people who have opinions and perspectives, sometimes complex relationships with their institutions, and they have their own priorities. And I think the best fundraisers, the best presidents are the people who understand that they are matchmakers. I hate the sort of meme of fundraiser as a storyteller because it reminds me of the kind of slick sales guy with the shiny shoes trying to sell you something. I really try to avoid that at all costs. It really is about, hey, we're all trying to accomplish the same things here. How do we do that in a way that creates a rising tide that lifts all boats? And I really try to avoid being too rigid, too formal. I try very much to be a what you see is what you get kind of person, so that really, when you spend a little bit of time with me, you know who I am, you know what I value, you know that I'll listen, you know that I care. And I think those are the most important things in establishing a foundation of trust that leads to fundraising success.
Here, 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 here. Let's maybe take a step even farther back and look at fundraising in terms of so there's Ohio Wesleyan, but then there's the greater fundraising landscape. And how do you see, not only being relevant, but um, being sort of the philanthropy of choice for donors, and how do you see that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Drew, and it makes me think of probably a half hour worth of narrative here. Um, you know, I think I would be remiss if I didn't start with just kind of what I'm seeing across the higher education landscape and philanthropic landscape. And it relates to what we're seeing across the economic landscape of the country. So wealth and income disparities in America continue to rise. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and the middle class feels like it's being squeezed. So more of America's wealth is concentrating in the hands of fewer individuals. And so not surprising to me that we are seeing fewer people who feel like they have the discretionary capital or income to give to charity. And we're seeing declines in donor counts. We have been for, I think, years and years now. Meanwhile, we're seeing donors make increasingly extraordinary gifts to charity. So we're seeing,
Sure.
50 million, 100 million, 500 million, even $1 billion. And we're seeing those things so often that it's remarkable that, $5 and $10 million gifts, which used to be cause for huge celebration, they just don't get that much coverage anymore. And they're not always going to the places where they're needed the most. In higher education, especially, there seems to be this trend of mega wealthy donors giving to already mega wealthy institutions. And that's exacerbating the wealth and income disparities we see in American higher education. But also, I think, across the rest of the entire nonprofit world. Now, there are exceptions to this, and I'm hopeful that this is the start of a new trend. So, like Mackenzie Scott and Melinda Gates are doing incredible things with unrestricted gifts to really worthy organizations. But generally speaking, I think we're seeing a greater bifurcation between the have and the have-nots in especially the higher education sector. So again, if it was the 80-20 rule before the pandemic, and maybe it's the 90-10 rule now or the 95-5 rule, this has really changed the path to fundraising and campaign success for a lot of institutions. So if you have fewer people giving more of the money, that tends to ratchet up the pressure to get it right and to land the big gifts with those precious few donors. But again, I think Mackenzie Scott and Melinda Gates are notable exceptions, but we're seeing lower interest from donors in providing unrestricted annual gifts. And of course, the annual fund is the lifeblood of so many nonprofit and educational institutions. Um, our Office of Advancement is, I think, doing incredible, admirable work to kind of custom tailor and personalize annual giving. So we're doing a lot better than many institutions, but it is becoming harder and harder to drive undesignated annual giving. Um, the last thing I'll say, just in general, is I think we're seeing a continued rise of donor influence on the priorities and decisions of our institutions. We're seeing some evidence of that in the wake of the, um, well, an example would be the resignation of Liz McGill at the University of Pennsylvania under donor pressure related to her decision making from the Israel Hamas conflict. But we're seeing lots and lots of examples of donor influence driving institutional decision making. And for the institutions that really, really need funds and that really have to make sure that their top donors are happy, that's an important thing for them to be thinking about. Uh, Donor influence was actually the subject of my doctoral dissertation at the University of Pennsylvania. So this is something I've thought a lot about. And not all donor influence is bad. In fact, lots of donor influence we want. So shaping strategic plans, for example, is a really positive use of donor influence. But all of this to me just heightens what I said earlier to you, which is that I think a path to success for certainly organizations like Ohio Wesleyan is being able to position the institution as the social problem solver of choice for philanthropists, and then to create a real partnership to work toward addressing that social problem where philanthropy becomes part, though not the entirety, of that partnership.
So good. So good. Um, I'm interested, having done your dissertation on that. Are there any, what did you learn? What were some of what did you come out of that realizing, or how is that impacting how you're showing up now as a university president?
Yeah, I will admit I did that dissertation in 2019, so it has been a handful of years. But I really would still like to put this into a book at one point because I'm really proud of the product that came out of this research. But what I realized is that when I came to Alma, um, I I noticed some ways that donors were getting involved in the priority setting and decision making of the institution that seemed different to me, and I wanted to know whether my experiences were normal. And as I kind of put my hand to my brow and looked across the higher education landscape, I realized that there really isn't anything written about donor influence, or there wasn't at the time. And in fact, one of the people that I recruited for my dissertation committee was actually the person in the literature, Noah Dresner, who said, "We don't know enough about donor influence." And so one of the things that I tried to do was to flesh out some of the ways in which donor influence occurs, both the donor influence methods, but then also the sphere of influence, and then start to talk about how institutions respond to donor influence. And perhaps if you take a step back and look at all of this, perhaps part of what I was simply trying to do was to create a vernacular, a common vocabulary that we could use to describe our experiences. Because what I learned is that donor influence exists everywhere. That a lot of people think of it as a bad thing, and it's not necessarily always a bad thing. I'm going to see if I can do this from memory, but I recall 5 different methods of donor influence. And so there's number one is making or offering a charitable gift, right? That's kind of a common
Sure.
one. Uh, Another is not giving, disengaging, or rescinding trying to rescind past philanthropic support. That's another sort of common one. Another is issuing threats, which is kind of a subjective thing. You know, you're out of my will would be an example of this kind of thing in a
Sure.
negative context, perhaps. Um, Another is leveraging your relationship capital, sort of the do you know who I am, and sort of the worst case expression of this. We're using thoughts about what they've done or could do or want to do as leverage. So, I'd be really happy if you were to do the following things, and I do have the capacity to make a 7-figure, 8-figure, 9-figure gift. And then the last is sort of coalition building and public action. So I think of like Sweetbriar College's donors coming to the rescue and taking the administration to court to halt the closure of Sweetbriar, and then basically to fire the board and fire the president and restart the entire institution. That's one of the most interesting examples of that. And then I remember that there were 18 different spheres of influence, so sort of uh, different realms in which those 5 different things would sort of appear. So like, um, gift restrictions and recognition is some of the most common stuff, but strategic plans, facilities plans, expression of religious identity, the curriculum and pedagogy, political stances, which we're seeing some of now, athletic, budget decisions, access to decision makers, Greek life, research priorities, and the list kind of goes on and on. So I learned a lot, and I became a president of an institution a lot sooner than I initially anticipated after getting my doctorate. So I regret that I haven't yet put this into a book, but at least my dissertation is out there and able to be accessed by the public.
We'll be sure to do a link to it. And for those who'd like to learn more, I'm sure lots and lots of good information.
Thanks, Drew.
Kind of wrapping things up, in doing a little research, Matt, about you, you served as student body president at Alma College, and you knew, it sounds like, from that experience that you might one day want to be a university president, which I found fascinating.
Who said that?
Tell me what did you know at that moment in time? What was it about being a university president that you thought, I think I would like to do that?
I'm going to turn this into a story about the power of a liberal arts education. So I went to Alma College, where I served as VP for advancement, as you mentioned earlier, and I was certain of 2 things. I was going to be a biology major, and I was going to go to medical school and become a surgeon. Fast forward to today, I'm a doctor, but not the kind that can help anyone. I didn't follow through on that initial path. And unlike a lot of students, so 4 out of every 5 students, 80% of all students who go to college end up changing their major at least one time, and I was no exception to that. I ran headlong into organic chemistry. I couldn't fit those 3D models together. I'm not even allowed to put IKEA furniture together in my house because I'm really bad at it. My head just doesn't think that way. But 17 or 18-year-old Matt didn't know that at the time. And then I did fetal pig dissection lab immediately after eating my share of corn dogs for lunch, and
Say
that
no
went about
more.
as well as yeah. You know how that went, Drew. So and that was a really hard lesson to learn. I was devastated because I thought my goal of having a life of service and helping other people was gone. And I was surrounded by love and by people who were willing to invest the time to pick me up off the ground, to dust me off, and to help me understand that there are other pathways to a life of service. And I found some footing, I found some grounding in student government. I became president of my class, And then that happened for a couple of years. And then my junior year, I became vice president of the student body. And then my senior year, president of the student body. And at the time I was serving as president, we had a brand new first year president who I got to meet with a lot. And she saw my interest in higher education, saw that there might be a career for me in that, and then she started to feed me opportunities to get involved with running the institution. And she said something to me. Now, this is 25 years ago. So think like 2001, she said this to me. So 23 years ago. She said this: I think you should consider becoming a college president. And more than that, I believe that in 20, 25 years, the only thing that small colleges are going to be talking about and thinking about is money. That's a pretty prescient comment, isn't it?
Indeed.
So she really knew where things were heading. And the other thing she said to me was, you know, you probably don't have the patience to go the traditional route into a presidency, to become a faculty member, to rise through the ranks, to become a department chair, to become a dean, to become a provost. And she said, I think the fact that you are motivated by competition, by energy, by running fast, and given what I just said about higher education thinking only about money, I think a career building partnerships, building relationships, and raising money will be a tremendous pathway to the presidency. And my goodness, did that advice change my life. So I graduated from Alma, 22 years old, knowing exactly what I wanted to do and making every career decision that followed in direct service to that oddly specific sense of vocation that I still have to this day.
Wow. So cool. What a great story. What a great story. Wow. And what a great note to wrap up on. Thank you again, Matt, for your time and for sharing so much great wisdom and learnings. And anyway, I wish you the very best, obviously, as you get ready to celebrate your 1 year anniversary. And thank you again for being part of Fundraising Leaders with Drew.
Thank you, Drew. What a pleasure. Glad to be with you.